Hi everybody, Steve from Steve's Makerspace here, and today we are back in Scrap Mechanic, and you know I love Scrap Mechanic, and you probably know if you've been watching my channel that I love patterns and I love logic in Scrap Mechanic, and the challenges of building something complicated in Scrap Mechanic. And so today I've combined my interest in fractals with Scrap Mechanic. The challenge was, could I make a fractal machine in Scrap Mechanic? And the answer, of course, is yes. So I've got the Sierpinski Triangle, and I have the Mandelbrot set, and I want to talk about what a fractal is and all sorts of stuff. This will be a fun video. Fractals appear in nature all the time. Like in the seashell, the large part of the seashell looks just like the small part of the seashell. If you zoomed in, it would look, this part would look just like this part. The same thing with the fern. The large part of the fern looks just like the small part of the fern. If you took this leaf, it would look just like this thing. This is a Sierpinski triangle, so you can see a triangle inside of a triangle, and then triangle inside of a triangle up here, and then triangle inside of a triangle up here, and it just gets more and more complex, but the basic pattern is the same. It's just repeated in smaller and smaller dimensions. And the most famous fractal is the Mandelbrot set. So you can see that this bulb here gets repeated here, and if you zoom in some more, it gets repeated again, and if you zoom in some more, it gets repeated again, and if you zoom in some more, it gets repeated again, and it can be infinite. As long as you keep computing, you'll still find more and more of the same thing, except now you're getting these weird tendrils. So there's some pretty amazing things with the Mandelbrot set, and I'll give you a link to this particular viewer so you can explore the Mandelbrot set on your own. Before I get into Scrap Mechanic, I'm going to show you the Sierpinski Triangle in Excel. It's a very simple formula, and then that formula just gets repeated all over the place in Excel. And then just put a 1 in the first row and it makes the Sierpinski Triangle. Okay, so here finally we're in Scrap Mechanic. Going to show you my Sierpinski Triangle. And it's actually an upside down Sierpinski Triangle. It was easier to turn it on the bottom than the top. If you turn on a switch in a different place, it changes the pattern. Now I'll turn off the first switch and you'll see how the pattern changes yet again. Here's a small bit of it so you can see how it's wired up. This is using the math blocks from the mod pack. It's also possible to build this with vanilla parts. However, there's a lot more wiring to do, so I wanted to save myself some of the time in wiring. But you can see here that they do the same thing. The back of the machine also produces a Sierpinski Triangle, sort of. It's not exactly the same, but pretty close. So that's it for this piece. It's available for download on the workshop, of course. So here we are in Scrap Mechanic again, and this is the Mandelbrot Set Maker. You can see there's lots of logic going on and settings, and this is the basic Mandelbrot set that's been produced. Using these settings, this represents the leftmost point where the top starts. This is the bottom measurement of the Mandelbrot set here. This is how many iterations there are, 25 iterations. I'll explain all that later. This is a color table. It selects which color is going to appear on here based on how many iterations it takes to produce that particular square. So let's go back to the internet, to this site, Science Demos org UK Mandelbrot, and let's say you want to produce this image. Now we're not going to produce the entire image all the way to the right. We're just going to get a square right about here. So if I want this image, and it's not going to be, of course, as detailed as this, obviously, but this is the number of iterations. I could change this to 30, and so it's still not going to be this detailed, just because this has a lot more pixels than my Scrap Mechanic machine has. But these are the coordinates we need to copy down. So we need the left coordinate, the top coordinate and the right and the bottom coordinate. Depends on how zoomed in or zoomed out you are, how many decimal points you need. You really only need these first 3 decimal points to get a pretty good image. So I'll get them copied down, and then we'll go over to our machine. Let's see, let's make sure this is off. So we don't want that on. So, unfortunately for the negatives, you have to change each of these to a negative position, not just if this is negative and these are positive, it won't work, it'll have the wrong result. So, the first one we've got has to be a -1 point, and so that's the ones position, and this is the first decimal position. -1.4, and I'll just zoom through updating these points. And the iterations. I'm going to set that to 30 iterations. Okay, and then we'll hit the reset button to make sure we're clearing out all of our memory bits. And now we can hit the start button and enjoy the show. Now this is really super slow, like it takes 50 minutes to generate an image, but through the power of editing we're going to cut that down to just a few seconds. Of course, I walk away from the keyboard and just let it go and then come back an hour later to check on it. So let's compare our final image to what we started with, and I can put them side by side, and you can see it's a pretty fair approximation. The colors are completely different. That's because the colors are just arbitrary. They're not scientifically determined. Now granted, it's pretty terrible as a Mandelbrot viewer, but it is the only Mandelbrot Maker in Scrap Mechanic. Let me show you some of the other things I've done with the Mandelbrot Maker. So here's an image from the internet, and this is just the same image with fewer iterations. Here's what I produced in Scrap Mechanic. I already showed you that one at the beginning. Here are the 2 images side by side. I pixelated this image up here so that it would more approximate what we're getting over here. And then here's another image. Here's what I got in Scrap Mechanic with my Mandelbrot Maker. Here are those 2 side by side. This is with more iterations. And then this one, and in Scrap Mechanic, and side by side. This one is pretty interesting. This is fewer iterations. Let's see, in Scrap Mechanic. And then this one, very nice. This is more iterations of the same thing as this. And then in Scrap Mechanic, I'm going to take a short pause here. We are going to get into the math and the logic of this build, but first, if you've liked what you've seen so far, please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel, and give me some comments. So now let's get into the math of the Mandelbrot set. What exactly is it and how does it work? So to understand the Mandelbrot set, let's just start with a number line and some squaring of numbers. So here's 0 on the number line, 1 and 2. If I take 2 and square that, that's going to give me 4. And then I take that number and square that number. 4 squared equals 16. And if I take 16 squared, that is 256, and it's going to just keep getting bigger as I keep squaring it over and over again, and this is called iterating. I'm taking the same number and putting it back into the formula. If I take a small number though, say 0.2, and square that, it doesn't get larger, it gets smaller. So 0.2 squared is 0.04. 0.04 squared is 0.0016, and 0.0016 squared is 0.0, I don't know, a bunch of zeros, 256. And so it continues to get smaller. Now if we go negative, say a negative 2, well, a negative 2 squared becomes a positive 4, and then you would square that and get a positive 16. So anything on negative just flips right over to the positive side. So that's important. Just understand that anything that goes 2 or greater is definitely going to explode. It's going to get really large. And anything that's smaller than 1 is going to stay really small. So the Mandelbrot set is going to be somewhere in here where things stay small and don't explode into really large numbers. If it explodes into a really large number, it's escaping the Mandelbrot set. Some numbers take a while to get out of the Mandelbrot set to explode. And so that's where you get all the colorful designs, is the numbers that are trying to get out. So the Mandelbrot set is really a pictorial representation of how many times each point in the Mandelbrot set took to escape the Mandelbrot set. Now here are a bunch of formulas that are used to create the Mandelbrot set, but you don't really need to know all this stuff. Mathematicians will talk about the imaginary number, which is the square root of -1 is equals I, but we can simplify that and just say, yeah, this is X, this is Y, and here are the formulas we're going to use to figure out the Mandelbrot set. So we're going to keep iterating where the X of n is the numbers that you'll be iterating with, and the X of 1 is the number you started with. Same thing with the Y of 1. Okay, so this will be easier if I show this to you, how this works in Excel. Okay, so here we are in Excel, and if I look at one of these formulas, it's pulling numbers directly above it from the X and the Y. Here's X, here's Y, or here's X, here's imaginary plane. And it's also pulling numbers from up here, which is basically the starting numbers. And so this formula is just copied. It's the same formula down here. It's pulling directly above it and from up here. And then this formula is pulling from directly above and also here. Each of these calculations is an iteration. So how many iterations did it take to escape the Mandelbrot set? If I start with, say, a 1, then, and this is a 0.5, then it only took 3 iterations to escape the Mandelbrot set. In other words, it got really big and then exploded. Whereas if I put in 0.1 here, it never escapes the Mandelbrot set. And you can see that it stays really small, and this goes down to, I think I put in 200 calculations here, and it just continued to stay small. But if I put in a number 0.32, then it stayed small for quite a while, but eventually it escaped at 31 iterations. So if I have my Mandelbrot set, I'm going to put, so it's 0.32 on the x-axis, 0.5 on the, not the y-axis, but the imaginary plane. You can think of it as y if you want, but at 0.5, so where these 2 points connect, you're going to have a red dot, because red is for number 31. That's an arbitrary color. If we do 0.33, so we got 1 pixel over to the left, to the right, that only took 20 iterations to escape, and so that's going to get a different color. That one might get blue. And if you do 0.34, that took 17 iterations to escape, so that one might be colored yellow. So all the ones that are 17 iterations get colored yellow. It's an arbitrary color, but everything that's the same number of iterations gets the same color. So that's how the Mandelbrot set gets painted. So here we are in Scrap Mechanic. So the top gets summarized into this number. You can see those are all flowing into here. And the bottom all gets summarized into this number here. There's also a calculation going on. Take the top number, subtract the bottom number, and then take whatever number you get there and divide by 19, because there are 20 rows here from top to bottom, and what I'm trying to get here is how many points do I need to add to go from one row to the next row to the next row, and the same thing with the columns, from one column to the next column. And so this is the answer for this particular set, and it's the same number to go from the row to row versus column to column because it's a square. So this is where the iteration math is going, and it's just doing what I showed you in Excel. I'm just taking those formulas and using math blocks to do the same thing. With each iteration we have to save the number we came up with into one of these memory blocks, and also each time we advance either a column or a row, we also have to save the starting number into a memory block. Every time we do an iteration, we have to see, is it greater than 2 or less than -2? If the resulting number is greater than 2 or less than -2, then it's going to explode, and then we know that we can stop doing calculations. This is the stop button, basically. Now, as each iteration happens, this is a color table, and so with each iteration, we're going from iteration number 1 to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. When it gets down to 20, if you've set this to be more than 20 iterations, then it goes back up to the top and starts over. So that's iteration 21, 22, 23, and then we're just reusing the colors. And then this is summing up what the color we've arrived at is here. So right now we're at green. It's bringing green over here, and then bringing green over there, and then green goes over here. And then there's the black. So if we get to the maximum number of iterations, so there's a formula checking to see if we've reached this maximum of 30. This is checking to see if we've reached the 30 iterations yet. And if we do reach 30 iterations, then we're just going to color, this is the black color, and then this is going to take over, and the block will be colored black. Now, in addition to that, the very center of the Mandelbrot set, like from here to here, if you see there's a rectangle in here, I decided that I wanted to speed up my machine, so I'm just going to check to see if the point is within this rectangle right here, and if it is, I'll just color it black, because I know that's definitely within the Mandelbrot set and will not escape. I could have done the same thing with this over here and this little square over here, but I decided not to do that. I just let all of that happen naturally, but I just wanted to save some time with taking this square out. So that's what this part does. It's checking to see if the numbers calculated are within that square, and if they are within that square, then we just stop with the iterations and color it black. Here it is in operation, where you can see everything. Calculations being made over here. Every time you get something here, that means it's gotten an escape from the Mandelbrot set. Here are the iterations Up here you can see the iterations going up and then clearing to 0. And here's where the color is being selected depending on how many iterations we get to. Here are the columns advancing and the rows. I should warn you that if it takes 50 minutes to do 30 iterations and you set it to 60 iterations, you can expect it to take like 2 hours. And you're not going to be able to go as deep as this. I mean, this is really deep, 4,000 iterations. You know, if I change this to 128 iterations, we don't even see anything. Now I'm trying to zoom out, and I still don't see anything. And here's where I see the first thing at 128 iterations. That's about it. I know this wasn't a complete explanation of the logic, but it's kind of hard to explain exactly what I did, and frankly I can't remember everything I did. So, but it works. It's really slow, and it's, like I said, it's the worst Mandelbrot on the internet, but it's the only one in Scrap Mechanic, and I'm proud that I was able to figure out how to make this happen. Okay, that's going to do it for today. There are lots of links in the description. There's the items on the workshop. I've got a couple of videos that I'm linking to, as well as websites on Fractals and Mandelbrot. Give me your comments, love to hear from you, and please like and subscribe, of course, as always, and thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye now. Steve's Makerspace.